All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's live stream on Kotlin 2.2 with the language evolution team. We're, of course, glad that all of you have decided to tune in with us today. We are live on both the Kotlin YouTube channel as well as the JetBrains Twitch channel. So, no matter where you are, I'm very excited to have you with us today on this wonderful journey, all about what's going on in the Kotlin world with regards to language evolution. I can already see the first couple of people popping into the chat here. Very good to have you folks. So yeah, as the title might suggest, we're here to celebrate a little bit the release that happened late last month, June 23rd, 2025, which was the release of Kotlin 2.2. And I think I'm in very, very good company to have this kind of celebration. So hi, Mike, you're the lead language designer for Kotlin, and hi, Alejandro, you're one of the Kotlin language evolution researchers. Good to have you here.
Hi, Seb, and hi, everyone.
So there's a whole lot of things that have gone into the release for Kotlin 2.2. There's really like a wide range of things that are happening here, right? Anything from like unified compiler warnings to the way that methods are generated for interface functions. Kotlin native gets LLVM 19 based support. We have a separated target for Kotlin WASM. There's some fun things happening with Binarian. Even Kotlin.js gets some love as well with some updates to the @JS plain object annotations, binary compatibility validations going on in the Kotlin Gradle plugin, and even beyond that, right? In the standard library, we're seeing things like the base 64 implementations that are now stable, as well as the hex format implementations that are also stable. But these are just kind of like some of the things that are going on. What I want to focus on with you folks today, because I think you are the ideal folks for it, is of course everything that goes into language evolution. Because, as I understand, quite a lot has happened here as well. Could you maybe give us a little bit of an overview here, Mike?
Yeah. So just to remind you that maybe a year ago we released the K2 compiler, and in order to do this, we actually had to postpone most of our language development, and in order to lock in and make the release as we wanted to. So now we are gradually accelerating language development, and in this release, we stabilized three syntactic language features, which is non-local break and continue, guards, and multi-dollar string interpolation, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And we also, one of our ongoing efforts is to stabilize things that were experimental in the compiler. And one of the largest things that was previously known as context receivers, which is now was renamed to context parameters, also was graduated to beta, and we hope to and we happy to share the results there, and invite you to try this feature, so hopefully we'll be able to make it stable soon. And also, part of our ongoing efforts is about so-called language tech debt, so that we can expand the existing features like type aliases to more use cases. And in this release, we also introduced an experimental feature for nested type aliases. So now it's possible not to declare them not only on top level, but also inside a class, for instance, to make the scope more restrictive. Also, we are actively looking into Spring and server-side. And here comes the next feature, which is about annotations, because we are looking into the new defaults on how annotations are applied, because every declaration in Kotlin can be actually transformed into several ones in the bytecode, and sometimes it's not clear where the actual annotation is applied. So it's whether it's a field or it's a property, it's getter, and so on. And last but not least, but the feature which actually goes through the many things in the language, and is called context-sensitive resolution, which helps us to just reduce boilerplate and remove qualifiers where the compiler can infer them without any problems. And that's the things that we'd like to share today. So do I miss something, Seb?
I think you have everything covered here. It sounds like it's going to be a really interesting time that we're going to have today. Lots of knowledge to be shared, but maybe also a couple of things that might bring up some questions in our audience. So please, if you're tuned in and you have any kind of questions about the subjects that we will be talking about today, but also about the Kotlin language evolution in general, please don't hesitate. Feel free to add your questions to the chat. After we've discussed each feature, we'll make sure that we take a little bit of time discussing any questions that relate directly to this. But also, if you have more general questions, we will have a dedicated Q&A session at the very end of the broadcast, where we will be talking a little bit more about those general things. But yeah, that pretty much covers I think everything here, and we can dive right in, and I can hand over to you folks.
Great. Then, let's start with the stable features first. And I'm going to show some code. I'm going to use IntelliJ nightly. So if something goes wrong, it's not my fault. And just the main outcome here is just not to do live coding in the future. And we'll start with guards. It's one of the features that becomes stable 2.2. So here I have a project with the configured 2.2 version and IntelliJ nightly, but you can also use a stable version of IntelliJ. And normally I would start with this example, which we show from time to time. It's just a class status that can represent state of an object or a service, or some result of a computation, whether it's loading or it's some failure with some problem, or it's okay and the computation was completed successfully. And we can do many things with it, but just to show where guards can be used, we'll try to write a render function, or at least take a look at it, how it can look like, which is normally, so what happens here? We just take this status object and we just go through various states that it can take. So if it's loading, then we'd like to return the string loading. If it's okay, but info is empty, then we want to present like specific information that there is no data. If it's just okay and we have data, then we can return this data to a user. And if there are some problems, then we just return specific strings about the result of this computation. So, and what are the guards? The essential feature here, or like the problem, is that we tend to repeat the status for each branch. And normally what we would do, we would just move the status into the when with so-called subject in order not to repeat it. But the problem is that here we have also specific requirements where we want to do additional checks, and the language didn't allow to move a subject status, in this case, to the when statement. But in 2.2 now it's possible, and just to make it work, we can invoke an id action, introduce when subject, and id will quickly change the code to use guards. So here, if is called guard, and previously we had end operator, and the reason is that it's not an end operator is that it's a slightly different, because it interacts with Boolean expressions in a slightly different way. But in a spirit, it's the same. So we can read this code as if its state is okay and status info is not empty, then we return string no data. So on the one hand, this feature is very simple. It just allows us to reduce some boilerplate, you can apply it in your project to have a slightly cleaner code. But also what we find important when we were looking into this feature is that it allows us to improve evolution of your code. So normally when we want to write a render function, we start with the simplest approach. We just return if it's loading, it's loading. If it's okay, then just return its data. And if it's failure, then we return string that it's a failure. A very simple. And in a few months, maybe years, we want to add more specificity to this. And for instance, now if the info is not empty, we actually want to return specific error and not just return like empty string, for instance. And in order to do this, we do the simplest minimal change possible to the code because we are lazy and we don't want to change all the when branches and move it from when to subject to regular when. So we just change this specific branch. And now when we, a few months, want to add a bit more specific information to this function, we change the other branch, is failure. And now the code contains some duplication with else branches. Its flow is slightly less clear than it can be. And let's see how it can be done with guards. So what can be, so with guards, if you start with the same function and want to add a slight addition to one of our branches, we'll just add this guard condition and an else branch. Then after a while, if you want to add more checks to other branches, we just add just one addition to our branch and that's it. So we actually don't have to introduce two else branches and have non-trivial control flow. And that's what I wanted to show about the guard conditions. Alejandro, what do you think about the other language features?
Yeah, so let me share two of the other stable features. To be clear, like all these features are now enabled by default, so you don't have to do anything to it. And actually, this shows a lot in this next feature, which is what I would like to think as an invisible feature. Is a code that didn't work now works, and that's what you expect. So from the kind of conceptual perspective, we are not bringing anything that just enable something that you couldn't do before. And I have here an example where the idea here is that you have a list of friends and you want to like somehow compute how many of them have the same first name. So you just build a map and then you just go around iterating, and then, well, at any point you add one to this map. That's simple. But then we need to have some kind of side condition here where we say if the first name is empty, is null, just break, just stop here because we don't want to continue. And this code works, right? This break will stop iteration of this for loop. But there was a problem before in the language that if you introduce one of these scope functions like run, so now we want not only to break, but we want to have some login, then you wouldn't be able to use break. This would just not work. And the reason is because this break was no longer, let's say, free floating. It was part of this lambda. But now we actually make it so that if your lambda is inline, and run is one of these cases, there is no reason why you cannot do this, because actually the control float is not transferred to another function. The inline function just inlines the body of run here. So break is kind of there in a spirit. So this was already working with return. So with return, your inline function were kind of transparent, but continue and break, which are the other kind of control flow, non-local control flow operators, this was not allowed. So kind of the feature is literally just making this work. Now the compiler can do this. Yeah, I see some saying like, yeah, non-local break is already here. Yeah, essentially this is kind of breaking from this function, from this for loop inside this function. The only kind of prerequisite is that this has to be an inline function. We cannot really change the flow of the code if this is non-local. But yeah, I mean, I guess for most people, what they will see of this feature is they write code, they introduce a run, and when I say run, this could be a let, and also one of these things that we usually don't think about that much, and then you have a break. Before it was red, now it's green, so good for everybody.
Yeah, just maybe to add like a tiny bit of historical context why we didn't do this, why we didn't introduce this feature in Kotlin 1.0 is that at that time we were thinking that maybe we have to reserve break and continue for inline functions like for each. So the other option that we had on our plate is to say that for some specific functions like for each or repeat, break and continue also behaves as like in for loops. But in the end, we see that in the vast majority of cases, we actually have other functions than repeat and for each, and it makes more sense and like more, we cover more cases if we just allow break and continue for all inline functions.
I think this is also just very exciting because it also means that whatever custom functions people might build, it's not like the standard library isn't in a special place here. If you build your own inline function, this feature like interacts with it exactly the same way.
Right.
Yeah. And let me show you the other one that we stabilize, which is this multi-dollar string interpolation. And this is just because like this solves a very specific problem, but one that a lot of people actually had, which is like if you want to write $1 inside a row string, you have to write this terrible thing where you're actually interpolated the dollar character. That's too annoying. And what I hated the most is that it actually doesn't interact with one of my favorite IntelliJ feature, which is that you can say that a string is in a particular other language, and IntelliJ knows how to do syntax highlighting inside. But this breaks because I want to have something which spits this, so it spits some LaTeX code, but I have to write this, so this is not real LaTeX, so it doesn't know what to do. But you can see that IntelliJ is actually already telling me that maybe I want to change this because this is annoying. So let's just do that. And you can actually see the result of this. So how this new interpolation syntax works is that you can actually specify how many dollars you use to use interpolation. So usually $1 is already means I'm interpolating. But if I write 2 now, that means that I need 2 to interpolate. So here, this has $2, so it's a certain interpolation. But this has only 1, so I don't need to do anything to interpolate this. So if you are actually creating something which requires dollars, this actually builds up in creating much nicer strings. So for example, I have here something slightly similar where we want also to create another language. We want to create a JSON schema. And in JSON schemas, you often write things like this. And again, before you had to use the dollar with a dollar inside, and now you can just say, well, actually, I want to interpolate with 2 of them, and when I only have 1, leave it that way. So again, this is like a small quality of life thing. Hopefully, you don't even need to think about that much because, as I've shown, IntelliJ will actually suggest you when you need to do this to write several, $1. And you can actually this is now extensible. So imagine I wanted to write 2 of them. I can just here write a third one. So now interpolation requires 3. So this essentially makes it work for all the future, right? If you need $10 together, you can just write 11 before, and then interpolation is with $11. So $10 are just kept in a row thing. And just to, sorry.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, we have a test in the compiler that checks how many dollars, I don't know, hundreds of dollars, so you can try to break the compiler. But it still works.
Yeah, hopefully our implementation is good enough. Yeah, so that's actually everything that, Yeah,
I just wanted to shout this out here, the comment that we got, that you showed it here with a JSON schema, but it also makes life easier if you have a GraphQL query, for example, that also uses $signs for variables. So the same thing applies here. You can use multi-dollar string interpolation, and the actual code becomes a little bit shorter or nicer to read.
Yeah, the last comment I wanted to say is that even though like raw strings is the main thing I've shown here, you can actually use this also with like regular strings. In regular strings, you can always escape the dollar with $. But you also have the option now to do it this way. So it might be interesting, as I said, if you're writing maybe some code which has a lot of dollars, to just put this dollars on the front, and then you don't have to go and escape each one of them. This might make your code slightly more readable. Yeah, but those are everything that we have stabilized. So the next are going to be the non-stable features, the things that where we want feedback from you. And I guess, Michael, you're going to first show how we need to enable them, right?
Before we move on to that part, let's just quickly see if we have a couple of questions here that maybe we can answer briefly. I'm just going to pop over back to Michael's screen again here for a second, because one of the questions comes from Matt, which is just maybe some clarification. Why did you end up using equals for status loading instead of the is? I guess that's everywhere here.
Yeah, normally it's there are no actually difference between this, so that there's a small difference that if I redeclare my equals, then equals will behave slightly different in a slightly different way. But for objects, it's not the case, and you're right that actually you can use is for uniformity everywhere.
Okay, very good. I think we've already cleared the one of the overall questions that came out with why is it not just the double and sign, but of course in everybody's favorite discussion, naming discussions, is there a reason why you picked if for guards? Wouldn't something like where be more declarative?
So hard to say, because it's part of the naming, and what we learned so far, that naming is one of the hardest thing, and we see if as a better alternative, because what I haven't showed that with guards we can also write more conditions with else if. For instance, if else if we have date is failure and something else. And so on, and we can have like a bunch of these else if branches. So elsewhere just doesn't sound that good here. It's one of the first reasons, and the second reason is that we potentially can see where we can use guards in more places. For instance, in the for loops. I'm not going to say that we are going to add this, but at least we want to keep the door open, so that when you write a for loop, you might want to have guard, and if also reads better in those contexts. But we had like a few rounds of discussions, like what modifier we want to use.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. There is one more question here regarding the features we just showed. So I'm just going to move back to Alejandro's screen here for a second, perhaps, which is in regards to raw strings. Amajona says, unfortunately, raw strings are not really raw strings. Can we get string prefixes to be able to change semantics on how escapes, new lines, and co-behave?
So the answer to this is that like what we are showing here is not the end of the road for many of these features. So we have been talking about this, and in many of these cases, and I think these strings are one of them, is like we want to, there are something which is clearly something beneficial to everybody writing Kotlin. So let's, we ship that thing, and there are some other things with the design, because once you get into raw strings, you actually have a lot of things where you can do, right? I remember we have a discussion one day where we wanted to be able to do trimming automatically, but there are so many ways to do trimming. So how do we enable trimming in different ways? Should this be extensible, right? There are so many questions that we decided that we are going to keep investigating this, but now we're going to ship this thing where we saw a clear design, which is kind of simple and already gives an immediate benefit. So again, this is not the end of the road. It's just like we haven't nailed the design for those things yet.
Great. That's a wonderful answer. I think we can almost move on here to just a couple of very nice points here. Bodan mentions that the multi-dollar interpolation also happens to help with AT proto lexicons, which is, I suppose, a part of the AT proto standard used by places like Blue Sky, because they also have special fields that are prefixed with a $sign. So in those scenarios, it works as well. I do love the slightly international question about whether we might be also able to use the euro sign instead of the $sign. Maybe the pound sign's coming sometime soon. But I think I'd probably suggest not holding your breath on that one. Okay, great. Yes, then I think we can move on to all the great things that are coming next as preview or beta. So I'm gonna move back over here to Michael's screen.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly show. So because we are going into the field of experimental features, I want to say, first of all, why we are doing this is that we, like, as probably all other languages, we want to be quite cautious about adding new language features to the language, because it's very hard or sometimes just impossible to take them back. And that's why, for instance, language development is quite slow, because we want to roll out them, check against like users, like against frameworks, whether it's possible and convenient, because it's often like a subjective thing that whether it's just convenient to use or not. And that's why it takes quite some time to stabilize a language feature. But still, today we want to, we showed like a few stabilized features, and now we also have a few features that are there in the language, in the compiler, but in order to use them, you have to enable a compiler key. And here, that's just how it's possible to do. So I'm it's a Gradle file, just can Kotlin section, compiler options, free compiler args, and just add these compiler arguments and pass them to the compiler. So for instance, -x context parameters enables context parameters, then nasty type aliases, and so on. And this -x means that this feature is actually experimental. And if you use our like compiler keys, you probably know that if there is no -x and just minus something, it means that this feature is stable. It just enables some different mode. But if there's X in front of a compiler key, it means that this feature is experimental, and just pay additional attention that the feature might change in the future or drop completely. But this is how it's possible to enable these features today. And with this, we probably can start with the first thing, which is about context parameters. And I think Alejandro will share more about it.
Very good. Let me bring Alejandro's screen back up.
Yeah, so context parameters is kind of one of the, I would say, big things that is coming in the release. It's actually something that has been going on for a while in the language before us receivers, but this idea has been going on also in other languages. And I'll actually briefly mention what you can do if you were actually using our previous experimental feature and you want to migrate to this one. I have a good news for you, but I will first show the idea in general. So there are two goals to what you can do with why we want to do context parameters. And I will show this with this example where we just have some kind of fake user service, and this user service allows us to get something by ID or to save a user. That's something simple. But it's very common that if you have some application like this one, you always have to have the user service all around, right? And what we want to achieve with context parameters is at the same time you get a lot of type safety. So you actually know at every point what are the dependencies you want. And at the other on the other side, you do this without having to write a lot of code. So this idea are kind of made concrete in the fact that what you can do now is declare that some of your parameters are context parameters. And I have an example here. So this function, get username, has a receiver parameter, but has a context parameter. And from inside the function, this context parameter is just any other parameter, right? I can just call users.getById, which is a member of user service. But if you are calling this function, you don't actually have to repeat this parameter over and over if you have already a function which has the same context parameter. So for example, if we have here the get friends names, and get friends names calls get username, the call is here, what you see is that there is no need to pass this user service explicitly. This is actually resolved by the compiler. So the compiler is able to thread all of this thing and know that this get username, which requires a user service, can get the user service right away from its parameter. So we are kind of getting into this situation in which you actually really declare what are the dependencies of your code, what services you need in this case, but you don't have to repeat them over and over if they don't change, right? So that was like goal one of context parameters. The other thing was that context parameters also allow us to shrink our kind of core APIs to a much smaller size. So for example, imagine I have this user service. Before there were a few things that you could not do as an extension function, so something which is defined separate from your core API that now you can do. And one clear example is this function user ID get username. Before, if you wanted to declare that you had a user service and then you also wanted a receiver inside, you had no other option than writing your fun user ID blah here. Because that was the only way to have this kind of double receiver. But now with context parameter, what you can do is just declare the function with the subject you want, with the receiver you want, in this case, the user ID, because that gives you the nicer API, and just make the rest just regular context parameters. So we have kind of separate this idea of receiver, of what you call the function to, from the idea of implicitly passing thing. And before we only had one way to do this, which were receivers, but now context parameters give you the ability to pass information around implicitly. And apart from this receiver thing, another thing that context parameter allows you to do is to have not only one, but more implicit parameters. Imagine we have now not only the user service, but the city service, which tells me things about cities, right? And now we have something where we want to get the cities where all the friends live. So for this, I need the user service to get the friends. I need the city service to get information about cities. Well, that's exactly what I'm declaring here, right? So I declare that I have these two context parameters, these two things I want to implicitly be part of all of these set of functions. And again, if I am calling city name here, all this thing is passed already implicitly, right? For city name, I need these two contexts, the user service and the cities, and get friends cities has both of them. So all of this is directly available to you, and it's implicitly threaded by the compiler. So that's kind of how you use context parameter when you are declaring the context. But there's, of course, something I haven't told you yet, which is, yes, at some point, I need to give you this user service and this city service, right? I need to, like, in the top left and the top of my application, I need to kind of inject this thing. And for this, actually, the API is very close to what we had with usual receiver, where you had the with function. Now we had something different, which is called the context function. And the idea is the context function adds this value as part of kind of your context inside this scope. And you can actually see that IntelliJ is telling you that now you have a user service implementation one, which is a user service inside this scope. And because I have this, I'm able to call getFriendNames, right? Because getFriendNames requires a user service in the context, and now I have one. So that's the first way you can get this. But also because we are aware that in the past, people were using extension receivers to kind of a very similar situation, right? To have this kind of implicit threading. It's actually able to go in the direction from an extension receiver into a context parameter. So for example, if I had a declare user service like this, I am still able to call one of these functions with a context. So you are able to go from extension receivers to context parameters, but not the other way around. And that essentially means that if you have something which was already working and then you want to change some function into using context parameters, the rest of the things will still be working, right? Because they were using the extension receivers before. It's only when you start injecting things as context parameter where you need to change your code. So that's kind of how context parameters work kind of in general. And I mentioned I also wanted to show you, like, if you were using the previous thing, the context receivers, that we actually helped you migrating this. So context receivers were essentially the same, but you didn't have a name because they were behaving more like receivers. So they were just part of the this inside your function. But you can see that if you open now this in with context parameter, we actually tell you context receiver should be replaced with context parameters. So you just say, please do it for me. It asks you for a name because now we need a name. And now everything is just fixed for you. So, and if you want to do this for your whole project, there is actually a way to do this. We have a blog post where we actually mentioned all of this. I don't remember because you have like per file, per project, all of that. So that's how context parameter work. We are actually hoping that people will use this to create even nicer APIs. There is also a lot of potential to use this to create nicer domain-specific languages and open some patterns that were not able before because we had this single extension receiver hole, so to say. But now this can be used for whatever you want and keep the rest as a context. So we kind of, we are eager to see how people use this idea of implicitly passing information in their libraries.
Yeah, very nice. Maybe I can show also maybe an example right from the Kotlin compiler. So it's my current object, my current project. And if you go to the Kotlin compiler, so this is a piece of code that you don't see, right? Because I'm sharing the wrong screen, of course. Can I try to redo this or?
Sure.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I just want to mention that context parameters have gotten a very positive reception here. I love that Sean Wild just said yippee. That's a comment we always love to see. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, this is a piece of code from the Kotlin compiler. It's just a checker. So it's this code checks some conditions. For instance, it checks whether like certain features are enabled or not, and then if they are used incorrectly or in a way that we don't want to, this code reports some errors. And here I just wanted to show you that it actually used these context parameters features. And what is actually very nice, like in terms of our development, is that we're trying to enable features that we want to ship to our users. And one of the quality gates that we have is that actually, if you like it internally, then it's something that we are ready to ship to the outside. But so it's just the first quality gate. And here, just if I try to like remove this context checker context, I'll get a bunch of errors. And for instance, I also get an error here that it shows me that there is no context for this function. So let's take a look at this declaration of this function. So here we have, again, context that holds like some session holder, which is actually includes some information about the compilation scheme. For instance, it includes information about the past compiler arguments. It holds some compiler version, API version, and so on. Because different modules can be configured differently. And also because it contains information about the past compiler arguments, it knows which features were enabled or not. And here it just takes this language version settings and checks whether a certain feature is enabled or not. And it goes into the core interface, which is like the analogy of that Alejandro showed. Here we have this core interface with language version settings that has just a few methods and a bunch of extension functions and functions with context receivers, context parameters. So why it's nice? The nice thing is that here we can just take a language feature, which is like a regular enum entry in a class, and check whether it's enabled or not in a specific context. And it's nice because it actually focuses only on the business logic. It's the only thing that we are interested in here. Because if you take a look at the previous code, how it looked like, previously we had to invoke context, then .language version settings, supports feature equals language feature, context parameters. And this is actually, while it's more explicit, it doesn't add any readability because it's actually something that we have to go through, and it just doesn't make much sense. And it's much clearer just to use this language feature context receivers. Dot is enabled. And nice thing is that you don't have to remember that there is language version settings in the session holder somewhere with context that has this thing, which can check whether a feature enabled is not. So here we just can invoke, and the IDE will help you that it's enabled or not. And also, as Alejandro showed, like how this actually invokes. So we have this. If you go to the super method, we'll check how it uses. It has a bunch of usages, but we are interested in this one. So here we just use with one context, second context, and invoke this check function now. And it's the only entry point where you have to pass this information, and the rest works with contexts. Yeah, so I hope that this example showed a bit of how it's used in like real life, and we have a lot of similar usages. And yeah, now I love to go to the next feature. I want to again quickly
just very briefly maybe see if we can cover a couple of questions here, because people are quite excited, and it seems that people also already had some experiences with context receivers. So just bringing up this question here briefly, you could apply context receivers to classes, but that's not supported with context parameters. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's actually one of the problems that we had with context receivers, for instance, because it was not clear whether it's applied to a constructor or to the whole class, and whether does it mean that properties become implicit or they act something specifically within members of functions. Like they all have like implicit extension, like extension receiver, context receiver, or it's just applied for a constructor.
So we also already see people here mentioning that Arrow already takes advantage of this, and it's raised DSL, so it's quite cool to see this already kind of out there. Another maybe small clarifying question that might be interesting is whether a function with context A with name A can call a function that requires context with name B, but also of type A. So the types are the same.
This is fully by type. That this is not by name. So we often use the same name, but you actually will see that there is like an underscore. So if you don't really want to give it a name because you are just using implicitly, you can even write an underscore and don't give it any name. So names don't matter. Types matter.
Yeah. So
okay. Does that can I have two objects of the same type in context?
that's complicated. So you can have them because if you have them in the context, you can give them names, right? And then you can choose one or the other in the same idea. Well, you can have two parameters of the same thing. The problem will be if you try to call a function which requires one of them, then you will have an ambiguity. It will tell you something like, well, I have two potential ways to kind of resolve this context parameter. I don't know what it is. So you will essentially need to do something, either, well, not do that first, but if you really want to do that, you could, what the thing you can do is that all these contexts also have scopes in the same way that anything else. So you could actually say context and use one of them to say this is actually higher in priority because it's in an innermost scope, and you can fix it that way. I don't think that's what you should do, but just to point that context parameters in that sense obey the regular rules of the language about the scoping. If you have two things on the same scope and we don't know what to do, you will get an ambiguity. If we can disambiguate because one is closer to you than the other, then that's how the thing will happen, because that's how the rest of the language works.
Understood. Great. Just one final question here before we move on. People noted that having a bunch of with expressions like all stacked next to each other looks maybe perhaps a little verbose. Is there something coming to introduce multiple context receivers at once?
Yeah, if you have context, if you use the function context that introduce several context parameters, then you can have, I think we have until 22. So hopefully you are not using the 22 overload, but you can use a lot of them, yeah, in one thing. Okay, there is a reason why with cannot do that. I don't know if you want me to, like, essentially that with you have a very sequential thing, right? Because every receiver has to be linearly ordered, so it has to be nested. But with context parameter, we can actually have several at the same time because, well, hopefully they will have the different types, so there is no problem with that, as opposed to with.
Okay, very good. That just gets you another yippee as an answer. Okay, moving on to nested type aliases, I believe.
Yeah, let me then quickly change my screen and. Yes. Yeah, fine. I'll learn how to do these things properly. So the next feature is relatively simply, like, especially compared to context parameters, it's one of the tech debts that we had in the language. So starting, I think, in somewhere like in Kotlin 1.5 or so, we introduced this concept of type aliases, where it's just possible to declare a type alias, which takes another type, and then it can be used in other contexts. And that allows us to give, first of all, some names, some meaningful names to, like, structures, to maps, lists, and so on. And also it's possible to make some declarations shorter, especially when you work with functional types or again with maps and so on. So in this example, I have just some class ID. I create it's a generic class, so I create a type alias person ID, which is ID of person. And I have a type alias friend map, which is a map from person ID to some list. And before Kotlin 2.2, actually even in 2.2, it's possible to declare type aliases only on top level. So it's just it wasn't possible to declare them inside class. And now with if you enable the experimental feature for nested type aliases, it's actually allowed to move them inside the class, so that the scope of this type aliases will be bounded to this class. But still, right now, if you want to use these type aliases only within the class, we can also mark them as private. So we just can write private. And it means that it won't be possible to use them outside the class, and then it means that you can freely change them without and not afraid to break some of your external users which might depend on your type aliases. Yeah, that's true. And again, the reason is quite funny. It's quite similar to non-local break and continuous, because this feature is not hard to implement. It's actually also quite easy in terms of the compiler development. But the problem is that at some point we were hesitant whether, if a class has a generic, should a type aliases capture this generic or not? Because at the time we were discussing such a concept as like static species, which can capture generics on the outside but being static. And in the end, we decided that for now, it seems that we don't want this, because like, again, it doesn't cover like that many use cases. So if you have a generic, it's not possible to declare here a type alias like friend list, just of some key. It's going to be unresolved reference. Maybe if you find use cases, important use cases that we want to cover, we introduce inner type aliases, which are quite similar to inner classes that can reference outside generics of your class. But for now, it's just not possible. They act as a static classifiers in a class. And that's it. That's it for this feature. I think the next one is about annotations, and Alejandro is mastermind behind annotations.
Is there some questions we want to touch about this before we move on?
People just really like this feature. That's the main feedback we've gotten on this one. So all good. Can move right on.
So go to the changes in annotations, and for this, I want to like kind of the solution is simple, but I want to showcase the problem here, and you know the thing is that this has this very small syntax to define some things, right? So you declare this data class person with a var name, and it actually expands to all of this, right? It has a property, which a getter and a setter, and actually a backing field, which is mentioned this, and this is also part of the constructor with a name, right? So say we want to do this, and we want to use part of the bin validation, the Jakarta validation library, something which allows us to validate uses of this class. So we have something like not empty, and you will see here that we have a warning. And oh, well, I don't know how to get out of this warning. It's too big. But the warning is telling you we are going to change how this behaves. And to understand this, I'm going to show a bit how this actually compiles into kind of the Java bytecode. So let me get here. Just see the Kotlin bytecode, and we don't need to see the bytecode, but let's see the corresponding kind of Java thing, because I think that's the easiest way. I don't know about everybody. I prefer reading Java code to bytecode, but what you can see is that here we actually see everything, right? We have the field, we have the getter, we have the setter, and we have the constructor parameter. All of this that I mentioned is now visible here in the code. And what you can see is that this non-empty annotation is only appearing in one place out of all of this here. And that was the actual the actual current rule that we want to change, is that if we have something where we have several declarations, we are going to choose one of them to put the annotation. And the rule actually says somewhere deep in the specification, this is chosen by first choosing the constructor parameter, then choosing the property, then choosing the backing field. This is the rule. And we figured out this was not a good default, because what will happen here is that imagine you are using person, right? And this is a variable. So actually this check for non-emptiness will only apply when you construct this value. But look, there is no check here for the set name. That means that we can actually break what we were supposed to warranty with this validation constraint, right? That the value inside is never empty, because as I said, the set name has no annotation here. You only see the not null, which is actually coming from the Kotlin compiler. The same happens with the name. We are not telling anything about this, and you could even say that we could move this to the getter here. So we figure out this kind of default was wrong. There is a bunch of people that actually have problems with this thing, but also with other things coming from a Spring, where you are also expecting to have things inside the field or inside of the getter, etc. So we want to change the default, but we want to do this step by step. So now what you get is a warning, which says that annotation will change in the future, right? And you can read more things. So if you want to change it now and kind of use the new better default, you can actually change this. And I will just reload, and then you can see that, well, there is not any warning anymore. But more importantly, if now I check the bytecode and I decompile, let me put this again side by side. Now you can see that the not empty is now also on the field. So now we are gonna really, so it's not moved to the setter and getter yet, but at least it's moved to the field, which means that when at the point where we actually try to change this, hopefully the validation constraint will fire, and then we will know that if this is empty, we have a problem, right? So now essentially what we decided is that what we need to do is to apply things to the property itself and to the constructor parameter kind of independently. So this thing just creates two different things, right? A property and a constructor parameter, and we apply this in both cases. Still, there is this all rule I mentioned. So this is all a bit convoluted, but where in a property, we first try to apply the thing to the field if we can. So this is what you see here, that we apply this to the field. And this seems to be the best default in many cases. We've been looking at a lot of libraries doing Java, and this seems like a good default, so a good variation of we had before, which doesn't change too much what we were doing, but now means that everybody using validation and a lot of Spring using Hibernate usually gets what they want, instead of having to dig into Stack Overflow answers to figure out they had to use field column, which was the usual answer. But if you want to go farther, we actually allow you to write all here, and this all here literally means just put it everywhere. So if now I show the bytecode again, what you can see here, and let me put it side by side, is that this is now here, and it's also in the getter, and it's also in the setter parameter. So if you have something like not empty, where you really want to check this at every potential point, all is now your answer. So we gave you a way to have all of this. You could get this before, but you had to write something like, let me find my, like get not empty and set param not empty. And so you could get this, but it was very convoluted. Now with all, you can get this. So in many cases, if you are using things like validation, you should now use all. We are still exploring whether it should be the default. It seems that maybe in some cases, propagating these things to the getter and setter is a good option. Some cases it is not. So we are trying to see actually, essentially by looking how users use this and what they expect, whether we would need to refine this thing even a second time. But for now, the idea is that right now you have the current behavior, but with a warning. You can enable and opt in with the new one, and in the next version, or maybe in 2 versions, this will be the new default, because as we said, it seems that the old way to do things wasn't very helpful for everybody. So yeah, this is what we've done with respect to annotations in properties.
Very good, and it seems like you're moving into the right direction here. Sean mentions that they've run into this exact problem. So hopefully with the new defaults, or with the flag enabled now, that should make their life a little bit easier. Very exciting stuff.
And actually, if you can just try enabling this flag and report us whether it helped or not, it would be really nice. because yeah, as Alejandro said, we are thinking about a bit more aggressive default, but it's sometimes very questionable because it really depends on frameworks and how they use annotations, where do they look at setter or field and so on. And it's just, yeah, very, very questionable.
Very good. Looks like they will be coming back to you. The question maybe, which is actually a great question for everybody, which is, what is the best way to give feedback?
Yeah, so you can either give feedback. So the preferred place is our Keep repository. So Keep is like the Kotlin evolution and enhancement process or something like this. I never remember the exact thing, but it's essentially a GitHub repository where we put everything we want to do change on the language, and then people can just discuss there on every topic. If not, just in a Slack there is a language evolution channel, I think, where we are happy to hear. And if it's something which you think is a problem, just feel free to open an issue. This has already happened with some of the behavior of context parameters, for example, where people say, oh, I think the behavior should be tweaked in this and that case. And we are looking at that to try to, in 2.2.20, actually tweak to have people having lesser pricing behavior. So any of those channels is anything we will eventually read.
Yeah,
perfect.
So specifically about Keep, you can open like Kotlin Keep repository issues and then find an issue about improvements to annotations and so on. And that's one of the places.
Very good. And I'll be dropping that link in the chat as well for people so that it's easier for you to navigate there. But I think for now we can move on to the next feature, right, Michael?
Yes, let's do that. Okay, so we stopped here. Let's open the next example, which is about context-sensitive resolution. So again, it's a relatively simple feature that just makes the compiler smarter. And here we have our original example with the render function where I showed guards. So if we go to the version with guards, it looks like this. And I started that example that we have a bunch of repetitions of this status parameter, and guards somewhat helped, but also we have like a bunch of like status checks right now, which again doesn't add much readability because we know that we have when the subject, which is like of a type status, and there cannot be any other type. So it doesn't make much sense to repeat this status all the time. So what the feature allows us, if just we take all the statuses and now we can remove them. So this context-sensitive resolution, it knows that we check branches against the status object, and we can look inside this type and see and use symbols from inside it. So we don't have to type status.loading, status OK, and so on. And the same applies to a few contexts. So the first context is when you just do when with subject. The second context is when you have, for instance, this equals equals. Again, if we check this status.problem, which is a enum class, only a certain enum entries can participate on the right-hand side of the equals operator. And there cannot be any other objects. So it means that we can just take this problem and also just remove the qualifier from here, which also adds a bit more readability and it's slightly easier to write code. So, and for instance, now if I want to create some class, let's say mode, which has full or let's say preview, and use it in this mode, I can just use this full without writing the modifier again, because here we have the expected type. And again, the only option that I can use here is just to use one of the enum entries from my class. So the compiler knows that, and now it allows me to write symbols from such an enum entry. And that's the feature. It's not the complete design. And one of the problems here that we see is that the syntax, people from Swift probably saw that Swift has similar feature, which is way more powerful, but also has its cost in terms of type inference and resolution, and they use dot syntax. So we are still looking into this feature, and it might change in the future. So yeah, try it and share your feedback, how it works for you. And I think we've covered all the features that we wanted, that we have in 2.2 as experimental.
Very good. That's been quite a lot. And there's a couple of questions regarding context sensitive resolution here. The first one is just that again, it's very nicely received. Must be my favorite new feature. Thank you for that, says Mark. Ivan also says that it's one of those language features that are explained in a single sentence, but after 2 weeks of using it, you can't go back, which intuitively I'd agree. I very much like looking at this code. It's quite nice. Regarding the dot syntax, Tyler also briefly mentioned this, that they like having the dot okay in here. There's a question here, which is whether this saves you from having just static imports.
It actually, yes, one of the cases that we considered is just maybe let's improve static imports or IDE so that it can automatically import such things. The problem there is that this feature often works nice with field hierarchies and enum entries. So when you have like a certain number like branches and so on, and it's very, very easy to run into clashes. So because like in a field hierarchy, we have this OK or failure or error type. And when we tried this, we actually automatically in one file, we have just 2 errors or 2 failures, and just hard to resolve these conflicts. So here it works locally and depends on the expected type. And the static imports, it just applies to the whole file, and that's it. Less convenient to use.
Okay. There is one question which I suppose is reasonable here, which is we have the connection in all caps, and we have your enum class mode with just the first capital letter for full and preview. Yeah. Are we leaning one way or another?
Like my personal stance is that screaming case is just legacy. It's something that we had to use before IDEs, because like it's something that allowed us to understand whether it's like a static concept and that it's safer to use in certain contexts and again and so on. But with IDEs, with color highlighting, I think it's just unnecessary thing, and I prefer to use always how's called so regular normal thing when you don't have to use capital letters for your names. But and right now both options are possible, but I hope that in the future we'll move towards this by default.
That sounds very good to me. There's one concern here, which I'm curious that might be worth addressing. Andre says that he's afraid that readability might suffer from this because it's less to type, but maybe it adds a little bit of extra confusion. So do you see this as a problem?
So the thing here is that we've tried to so the feature, let's say it's clever, but it's not clever. It's try to be, and that's where the feedback comes in. It tries you to remove the obvious, right? As we've seen here, right? That you have the typical initializer where you say mode equals full. Like, what else could this be, right? You are just most of the time repeating the same thing. In the case of a when statement, we see that in most cases they are the same thing. The subject is closely related, so you know what it does. But for example, something which we do not do, because this will this will give you this problem with understandability, is that what you can reference with this context-sensitive resolution must always be something very simple, like a enumeration entry or a property. It couldn't be another function. You don't have a chain of this has been resolve with the context, and because I resolve this function from the context, I resolve the arguments from the context into a change of context things. The thing you resolve is just one single thing, and hopefully the place where the information is coming from is close enough to do this. So this is how we are trying to balance in between things should be smaller, but they should also be kind of obvious. So if whoever wrote the question is interested, you can actually read the keep and see the actual kind of list of things where we do things and how we kind of propagate this information to have the full picture. And hopefully this will give the exact definition of the feedback they want of how this is all propagated.
Yeah, I think here, like if we really just look at the examples that we've seen here, it was really just like removing the word that already appeared, like either literally in the same line, like the previous word that's no longer duplicated, or the line that, or the declaration that's like 2 lines higher. But Sean also mentions that probably, in case that part is still too confusing, it would be possible to, I mean, since the compiler infers it, there's no reason why the IDE would not be able to show this to you as part of, for example, an inlay hint either.
Yeah, but again, in general, that's one of the reasons why we do not release features fast, because sometimes it can be just subjective. And there's surprisingly small amount of researches that checks whether like certain constructs lower cognitive load or not. And that's why we just have to try it like ourselves, gather feedback. And even if the feature is absolutely fine from the language perspective, it might be just not convenient, or just we might not be sure, and we can like postpone this or do something about that. So if you try it and feel that it's harder to read, just again feel free to submit such feedback.
Absolutely. Okay, well, it really seems that Kotlin 2.2 is quite a feature-packed release. So thank you again for this presentation. We have a couple of questions, though. So even though we are slightly over time already, I'd like to try covering just a few, and then we will wrap up here. One of the questions that we missed beforehand on the subject of nested type aliases comes from Raul, which is, can nested type aliases be abstract and materialized in subtypes to concrete types?
No.
Okay, very good.
No associated types for you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Then one other question on the topic of context parameters. Can you add them to constructors?
Yes. I think no.
I think no. In this release, yes. Right. In this release, it's not allowed to use them for constructors.
Okay, understood.
But this is something that will be possible in the future.
All right, and then maybe as a follow-up on this, are they available for extension properties?
Yes, you can like declare a property, which any kind of properties can also have context parameters. So this is not, we've shown here examples with, I actually have one example where the context parameter was in a property. Maybe that was, I didn't highlight that, but yeah, anything that is callable, so a function or a property can get context parameters.
Okay. Very good.
I see somebody, by the way, I saw here in the chat, like somebody took, I think maybe our like no associated types as everything. It is now, like right now, again, we are okay. Here's the lead. So he says no.
No associated types, like at least in the next few years.
All right. Well, there's a lot of questions that are still maybe. Well, I'm not sure if there's so much questions as there are requests, but we're seeing some potential love for explicit backing fields, which might be hopefully coming out at some point.
Yes, just stay tuned. So actually, again, you can check the Keep repository, but this time we can open discussions tab, and there's an updated proposal regarding explicit backing fields. And the previous proposal had a few drawbacks that we finally addressed. And good news is that we want to start a prototype of this new version right very, very soon, or maybe even already started. So yeah, there's updates, and I hope that in the next stream we'll share more about explicit backing fields.
I mean, if you all go to the Keep repository, you can essentially see what we are thinking about the next 2-3 versions in the language. So not everything that we are now is now in the Keep repository is coming in the next version in 2.3, but it's things where we are taking seriously and we are really getting the feedback and iterating so that we can get them at some kind of near future.
Very nice. Another question here is on what the status of multi-field value classes and that related prototype is. I'm not sure if we have something to share here.
Again, no updates, and I believe this is something that we should not follow. So because the reason is that Valhalla project, I really hope that it will come soon, and multi-field value classes, if we do our own compilation scheme, first of all, it won't be effective in terms of performance. It's possible to do some scalarization in a very, very specific cases. And for instance, we won't be able to do heap flattening at all. And for instance, if we return such a multi-field value class, then we will have to box it every time. So that's just it's not worth it. And we want to reuse GVM and GVM capabilities when they add value classes and to the GVM and Java. And instead of this, we want to introduce more capabilities for immutability. So we want to introduce convenient updates of value classes, but take all the performance gains from the GVM platform.
Just to add is, if you are interested on this, there is a talk from KotlinConf 2025, so just month and a half ago, from our colleague Marat, who dives into what is the vision on all of these immutability, value classes, scoping, all of these related topics. So I don't know if those are published yet, but if not, it will be.
They're all already available on the Kotlin-Lang website, and we'll also be bringing them out day by day here on the Kotlin YouTube channel. So make sure you also subscribe here and check out the notifications. Great. Yeah, we're coming up on the end here. So maybe just a general question here, which is that these features are great, but like you mentioned, they are in preview or they are experimental. So can we use them in production?
I mean,
I would say
that
Hunter, go.
I'm gonna say that I mean, they are in preview, and that we want to signal with this that we would even take them away, change the syntax and all of that. So use them with caution. There are some which are less likely. I don't really foresee that we will remove nested type aliases because they are a small thing and so on. But yeah, things like context sensitive resolution may change because we can get feedback about these things. We are, for example, in 2.2.20, we're already changing a bit how context parameters behave with DSL marker and restrict suspension because there was some open questions there that we are changing. So all of this means that potentially code that compile no longer compiles, and we are giving ourselves the room to improve that before setting the thing into stone. So I would really so I think the full answer would be, if you compile something, the binary is either poison, which means that we detect this and we tell you don't use this. And if it's not poison, that means that the bytecode we generate is okay. but maybe the source will no longer compile in the next version of the compiler. So yeah, that's up to you.
But yeah, I'd say that my honest answer would be that you have like more or less huge code base, then it would be better to avoid using experimental features in your project, as well as like experimental API and so on. But only if it doesn't, if it solves your specific problem, or it's your code base, you know that you can upgrade fast enough, then it makes sense. For us, it's definitely available, but for you, you might get some migration because it's an experimental feature and it might change.
Makes sense. Okay, great. Well, I think we've pretty much covered all of the major questions that we've gotten here. So thank you very much, everybody who decided to stay with us to the end here. And it's been quite a lot of things here, right? I hope everybody is well equipped for their Kotlin 2.2 adventure. If you want to get started, obviously step one is just update your Kotlin version to Kotlin 2.2.0 and start enjoying. You've already seen that there's a couple of features that were stabilized, right? That was guards, that was a non-local break and continue, multi-dollar interpolation, and we've also seen how to enable a couple of the features that are already in preview, right? That's everything from context parameters to nested type aliases that make working with longer types a little bit easier. Changed property annotation defaults, which really help you, especially if you're working with, for example, validation annotations, including the all use site target. And we've also seen how context-sensitive resolution makes things a whole lot shorter. So yes, if you would like to learn a little bit more, we're also sharing the link to the What's New in Kotlin 2.2 post in the chats next to this wonderful window. So we would very much encourage you to dive a little bit deeper there, try out the features, and most importantly, give us feedback, like we said, through our channels. So either on the Kotlin Slack channel, on the Keep repository, or wherever else you can get a hold of us. If you do want to have a little bit more Kotlin content, make sure that you do also subscribe and turn on notifications. We're currently highlighting one talk from KotlinConf every day. There's a lot of exciting content that's already out there, and even more that's still coming. Yeah. So, Mike, Alejandro, thank you so much for all of these insights. That was a really good time.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in. Hope to see you in a future episode. Take care, everyone.